You are living abroad in Germany, in Weidhofen, Bavaria, and every day on your walks, you cross paths with a small white shrine. On the shrine, there are names, and behind it stretches a large open field. You have no idea about the history of this shrine, so, intrigued, you ask around the local bar and learn of the horrifying murders of a family and their maid in 1922. The shrine you passed every day was for the victims of the Hinterkaifeck murders, a tragedy that remains unsolved to this day. Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Jax, and this is Morbidly Macabre, the show where I talk about morbid history, true crime, cryptids, and other spooky topics that might catch my interest. Today, we are dipping back into true crime with an international case that still is unsolved. If you like the video, please consider hitting the like button, and if you want to see more from me, please consider hitting that subscribe button as well. I also stream over on Twitch 5 to 6 days a week at Jax Marie Gaming, and I'm working on getting back to a weekly video schedule like I had before. I started my new job, and hopefully we continue to go weekly. Well, let's get back into today's topic. So, before we start with the murders and the details of everything, let's discuss the name Hinterkaifeck. Hinterkaifeck is the name for the farm that the Gruber family lived on. Hinter meaning behind, and Kaifeck is the name of the hamlet that they lived near. They lived in the woods behind Kaifeck, therefore Hinterkaifeck. As with the Black Dahlia case, some of the more famous photos of this family are of their dead bodies, and I'm not okay with showing that to an audience. I feel like that's disrespectful to the family, so I'll be showing other photos where I can instead. So let's start with introducing the family and what we know of them. Andreas Gruber, 63, lived at the farm with his wife, Kazelia, 72, their daughter Victoria Gabriel, 35, and their daughter's children, Kazelia, or Silly, 7, and Joseph, 5. Also found with the family was Maria Baumgartner, their maid, who was 44. Andreas was a farmer, and Maria had just joined the family to be their new maid on March 31st, 1922. But let's talk about some of the events leading up to the murders. About 6 months to a year prior to the murder, the maid that they had previously quit, saying that she thought the house was haunted and she was scared to be there. She heard footsteps in the attic and other strange noises, and she also spread word among the town of this haunted farm. In the month of March 1922, Andreas noticed a newspaper on his property from Munich, a newspaper that he himself did not subscribe to. And at the time, he didn't think anything of it. Maybe the postman lost the newspaper on his farm. However, according to the interrogation of Joseph Mayer, the postman at the time, no one in this area subscribed to that specific newspaper. I'll also be referring to his interrogation later, as he has some key details for the time frame. Andreas also discovered tracks on his farm and a broken lock days before the murder. During the night, he also heard footsteps in the attic, and after investigating, saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, none of this was reported to the police, as they didn't think it was anything serious. On April 4th, the neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, finds the bodies of the family. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, wait, where's the details of the murders? Don't worry, we're getting there. But like with the police, we're going to work backwards. 4 days passed between the murder of the family on March 31st and the discovery of their bodies on April 4th. While mail was piling up, the postman only delivered the newspaper on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to this residence, according to his interrogation. March 31st was a Friday, so they got their paper that day. April 1st and 2nd, Saturday and Sunday, it was the weekend, they didn't get their paper. The 3rd was a Monday, so the postman would have delivered the paper to his normal spot. And during that time, coffee sellers went by the house to get an order from the family, and when no one answered, they looked around but didn't see anything out of the ordinary other than an open gate. On April 4th, a mechanic showed up and he waited around for about an hour, and when he couldn't find anyone, he just did the job and left. The neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, then sent his sons to see if they could find the family, and when they returned unsuccessful, he and 2 friends went over and found the bodies of Andreas, his wife Victoria, and her daughter in the barn. The bodies of the maid and the youngest child were discovered in the house. The house was a mess, and it was lived in. Food was consumed, the paper was read, the animals were cared for, and there was evidence of a recent fire in the fireplace. It was clear after the murder that someone lived in this home for days after. It is believed that the 4 victims that were found in the barn were lured in one by one and killed with a mattock. The weapon was not found at the scene, but it was found later in the attic of the house. Autopsies were conducted in the barn. Warning, this will be getting into some pretty gruesome details. If that is not something you can handle at this time, there will be a timestamp on the screen if you don't want to hear any of it. Andreas was killed by a different weapon, a pickaxe. Everyone else had some degree of overkill. Kuzelia, his wife, had 8 blows to the skull. Victoria had 9. Maria had some injuries, but 1 hole in her skull, and Joseph had a single blow. But the youngest, Silly, Victoria's daughter, suffered the worst of everyone. She had 1 hit to the skull, but she didn't die from that. She also had a smashed jaw from where the killer used an iron band to silence her screams, and she was found partially undressed. She had pulled out her own hair from the stress of it all, and her throat was slit with a pocket knife, which is what did end her life. It was difficult to get good evidence at this time due to the number of people who were in this crime scene, moving the bodies, moving items around, and even using the kitchen, which had evidence that somebody was living there after the murders. The crime scene was contaminated, which made it that much more difficult to find out who did this. There was no clear motive either. It wasn't a robbery, as there was money in the house that was not touched. Now let's talk about 3 possible suspects. 2 that I think are the most likely, 1 that's a little far-fetched, and maybe a 4th one that I think is the most likely to have done this. First suspect is Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who found the bodies. Lorenz was very suspicious from the start. It was rumored that he had a relationship with Victoria, who at this time was not yet widowed, and that he had fathered Joseph, Victoria's son. He also had a key to the house, a key that might have gone missing from the house several days prior, and went into the home alone when discovering the murders. He also could have had the key because he was Victoria's lover. That part was never really clarified, but he did use a key to let himself into the home. When asked why he went into the home alone, he told his friends that he was looking for his son, allegedly. Now, all of this is allegations and speculation, but he is a pretty solid suspect. Another suspect is Paul Mueller, a German migrant who was the only suspect in a similar murder in 1898 of a family in Massachusetts, and there is a theory that he killed several others. He was also considered a suspect for a similar murder in 1912 known as the Villisca Axe murders, another topic that I'll be discussing in a future video. Now, we don't know if he was in Germany at the time, but because of the murders in the United States, he might have returned to the country due to public scrutiny. I think this is a pretty good, solid, possible alternative. Bill James wrote a book about this theory called The Man from the Train, and it's a good read if you're into true crime and you want a little bit more information about this theory. The third suspect that I want to talk about, though there are several others, I just kind of focused on the main 4, is Carl Gabriel, Victoria's deceased husband. He was reportedly killed in the First World War in France, but his body was never found, and Victoria did conceive and birth Joseph, her youngest son, while he was gone. Now, Lorenz might be the father, but there is another possible father, Editing Jax here. I'm just warning you now, I'm about to go into a little bit of a conspiracy theory. None of this has been really supported by evidence, except for the conviction that I'm about to talk about. And a lot of this I found on Reddit after falling down a little bit of a rabbit hole researching this. Now, this was like 3-4 weeks ago, but this is all an interesting conspiracy, which is why it's still included. Thanks. Her own father, Andreas. Victoria and Andreas were both convicted of incest by the town, so possibly Carl Gabriel came back from the grave to murder them for this. Which, while not entirely out of the realm of possibility, I think it's a little extreme. Victoria was receiving money from the government as a widow of a deceased military member, but there were sightings of Carl Gabriel after his death, so this is kind of a possible theory as to who could have done this murder. Now, I know when I started, I said there were only 3 suspects I wanted to talk about, but as I was researching this topic and getting further into the script, there is a 4th theory and a 4th suspect, and that's Andreas Gruber, the father. He was known to have a history of being controlling and having an incestuous relationship with his daughter. Victoria's daughter told her school that her mom and her grandfather got into a huge fight and that her mom ran away to the woods and her grandfather brought her back a few days before the murder occurred. The murder weapon, which was found in the attic of the home, was a mattock that Andreas had modified to stun pigs himself. And using this mattock, which had a nail attached to it, took a lot of skill to wield in order to accurately hit a skull and kill something. This mattock was used on everyone else, but not on Andreas. Something else killed Andreas. This could also account for why someone lived in the house for days after the killing. He tended to his farm, tore a day off of his calendar, and just lived as normal. There were some reports of people seeing someone around the farm during this time on April 1st, so it's likely that he was still alive at this time. But then who killed him? I think most likely it was Lorenz Schlittenbauer who killed Andreas. But again, this is all speculation. It's just so bizarre to me that this case has remained unsolved for so long. There was an attempt to use modern investigation techniques in 2007 by students from a police academy in Germany, and while they agreed on who their main suspect was, they didn't report his name for respect to his descendants. It's just strange that there's so many loose ends and contradictions, and not to mention the complications to the story. There's just so many theories as to who could have been the suspect, but after researching this, I've come to a conclusion on what I think's the most likely, but there's still so many unanswered questions. While I don't believe that this case will ever be solved, I hope that the victims of this horrific murder do rest in peace. Well, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. If you liked today's video, please hit that like button and leave me a comment if you have any topic ideas or suggestions or something that you might want to see in the future. If you really enjoyed today's video and want to see more from me, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification icons so you get notifications every time I post a new video. I also stream over on Twitch 5 to 6 days a week at Jax Marie Gaming, and thank you all once again for joining me today, and as always, stay curious. Goodbye.